Hello.
Good afternoon. Just letting in some people as they come in, admitting everyone.
You know, I'm so looking forward to this presentation.
Oh, good, thank you.
When I was in the Navy at Sengli Point in the Philippines, we were in communication with NLK.
Okay, that's excellent.
K7 what?
So I am going to ask that everyone participating mute yourself, and if you are able to please perhaps turn off your videos. It helps with our connections as we work through any technical issues we may have. If you want to have your camera on, feel free, but if not, we do ask that you turn it off. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So I just want to say good afternoon to everyone. Thank you so much for joining. It's great to see so many of you here today. My name is Holly Borth. I'm here representing the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation. We're also known as DAP, or the Washington State Historic Preservation Office, or the SHPO office. DAP is Washington State's primary agency with knowledge and expertise in historic preservation. We advocate for the preservation of Washington's irreplaceable historic and cultural resources as assets for the future. I'm here today to introduce today's speaker, Lex Palmer and Dr. Susan Hughes, who are going to take us on an exploration of the history of Naval Radio Station Jim Creek. At the end of their presentations, we also have an 18-minute video to share with you. And if you have any questions during the presentation or afterward, we do ask that you write them in to the chat box, and we will get to them at the end of both Lex and Susan's presentations and the video. And we will get to all of them if we can. So from there, I'll just again reiterate, thank you all so much for participating. It looks like we have hit our maximum entry, so we are going to have to, we are recording this for those who aren't able to attend or who weren't able to make it before we hit our capacity for this meeting. So again, thank you all. And I'll hand it over to Susan to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Well, welcome. I have a PhD in archaeology at the University of Washington, and I've worked in archaeology for 40 years in the private sector in teaching and research, and then most recently as a regional archaeologist for the U.S. Navy Northwest region. I want to thank you for coming to this presentation and for your interest in history. History is very important because the narratives of the past have shaped our present. So it helps us understand the present that we live in today. So I guess I'm getting started, right, with the historic landscape?
Actually, I'll begin, Susan. My name's Lex Palmer. I am the NAVFAC Northwest Region architectural historian, and I also function as the Naval Station Everett Cultural Resource Manager. I'm responsible for the management of onshore resources ranging from the Midwest up to Alaska. I've been in this position about a year. I came to the Navy from the Bureau of Reclamation in the California Great Basin Office, where I handled cultural resources for hydropower and water conveyance projects in 3 different states. And just up front, I want to tell you, we're expecting to have some technical issues just because it's the pandemic, but we'll work through those. And to begin with, this public presentation addresses a memorandum of agreement stipulation between the Washington Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation and the U.S. Naval Facilities Engineering Northwest. It is the mitigation for the replacement of the Worthington Generator and modernization of Building 39 located at Naval Radio Station Jim Creek. Jim Creek is located in Snohomish County. The generator housed in Building 39 since 1957 has served the installation as a primary emergency backup power source for over 60 years and throughout the critical Cold War period. While the generator has been reliable and reached the end of its service life, replacement generators will allow the Navy to move forward with modern backup power generation that is more efficient and produces cleaner air emissions. The following narrative It provides a culture resource overview of Jim Creek installation, its prehistory, historic period, and how and why the Navy constructed the radio station. Our presentation will begin with an examination of how Native Americans lived at the site, followed by Euro-American settlement and land use. The technology of how the radio station functions will then be presented along with what the Navy mission it served during the 1946 to 1991 Cold War period and the present day. When this slideshow ends, you too will know the secrets of Jim Creek. Let's see. All right. There we go. The radio station transmitter is located near Oso in Snohomish County. Before you is an image showing the Worthington Generator, a machine that is the size of a railroad locomotive. Let's begin with a look at the people who lived and used the land at the radio station Jim Creek installation before its construction in the 1950s. And I apologize, we have a little bit of lag. There we go. All right, Susan, please take it away.
Okay, thank you. Situated in the foothills of the Cascade Mountains, 21 miles from Puget Sound, the terrain of Naval Radio Station Jim Creek is one of steep hills and deeply incised. Hey, Lex, can you move it back to the last slide?
I'm going to try that. Kind of did it on its own.
Sorry
All
about
right. Let's try. All right.
So Jim Creek is one of steep hills and steeply incised narrow valleys. The upper Jim Creek drainage, a tributary of the southern branch of the Stillaguamish River, flows through the valley where the transmitter was built. The sedimentary and volcanic rocks exposed in the steep ridge slopes surrounding the station were once part of an offshore island chain that collided with the Cascadia subduction zone 90 to 100 million years ago. Prior to 1900, the valley and slopes were covered in a dense western hemlock, Douglas fir, and western red cedar forest. The valley was first logged in the early 1900s. However, a small patch of old-growth western red cedar forest still remains along Cub Creek. So if you take a map, an installation map, you see that through the northern part of the installation is the upper Jim Creek Valley. And there is a tributary to that which flows in from the west side that extends southward through into the south area of the installation. And this is Cub Creek. And Cub Creek begins at two lakes called the Twin Lakes. And if we could see that slide that just disappeared previously, that shows a picture of the Cub Creek Valley and one of the Twin Lakes. There is a remnant of the old growth forest in Cub Creek today. This was created by Walter Briggs, who was a forester with the Navy, and it's now called the Walter R. Briggs Old Growth Forest Reserve. I've seen this, and some of the western red cedar in this forest are so big. I mean, you can't even come close to putting your arms around them. They're so big. Today, the region supports black-tailed deer, woodland caribou, black bear, beaver, and snowshoe hare. And in the past, 3 species of salmon spawned in Jim Creek. Jim Creek was referred to by the Native Americans who lived in the area as Claxco, meaning closed in or folded up, which is an appropriate name given the very narrowness of the valleys. We've not found any early Native American archaeological remains within the Jim Creek boundary. However, we do know that the area within the region of the Stillaguamish River, upper and lower Stillaguamish, were well inhabited by Native Americans, at least for the last 9,000 years. The earliest hunter-gatherers that lived in the region were what we call, archaeologists call, the Olcott culture. And these were hunter-gatherers who lived on the high terraces above the Stillaguamish River between the dates of about 9100 and 7400 BP. We've also found remnants of Olcott culture in other parts of the Pacific Northwest, including the Olympic Peninsula and elsewhere. So they were fairly widespread, but their core area seemed to be in the Stillaguamish Valley area. The kinds of artifacts you find on their sites are like large, bifacially flaked, leaf-shaped, bipointed, and stemmed projectile points and other stone tools. In the upper left-hand corner of this slide, you can see some types of Olcott tools. We call them bifaces because they're flaked on both sides. And they're exceptionally large because at that time they were using larger weaponry like atlatl dart and also thrusting spears. This was before the bow and arrow appears in the archaeological record. Okay, you can turn the slide, Rex. Or do I do that?
There's a gap. Pause.
Okay.
Between a click. Oh, sorry, folks. Let's try that.
There we go. Thanks. After 2,500 years ago, the regional cultures evolved into a very distinctive Northwest coast culture pattern. These people were complex sedentary hunter-gatherers who inhabited permanent winter villages in the winter along rivers and the shorelines. And then during the summer, they would disperse to other areas in small hunting parties. Many of the winter villages are located along the Stillaguamish River in Snohomish County. Their inhabitants procured salmon, trout, whitefish, deer, elk, bear, small game, roots, bulbs, nuts, and berries. While we don't think there were probably any winter village sites in the upper Jim Creek Valley because it's too narrow and well away from the larger river areas, we think that probably the indigenous people at that time likely hunted and fished within the Jim Creek Valley area. This slide shows a winter,
Sorry.
a little too fast, okay. The Stillaguamish tribe of Indians inhabited the Jim Creek area in the early historic period. The Stillaguamish speak the northern Lushootseed language, a branch of the Southern Coast Salish group, along with many other tribes in the region. They call themselves the Stillaguabi, or river people. If you look at this slide, you can kind of see the layout of the land here. On the left is a map that shows the South Fork of the Stillaguamish River, which was called the Achalutich by the Stillaguamish. I'm probably not pronouncing that correctly at all. And then Jim Creek, which is the Klatsko, and then you can see the installation boundary to the east of the Jim Creek River. So most of the installation lies in the upper Jim Creek Valley. And then you can also see Cub Creek down there on the left side of the installation, originating in the Twin Lakes at the very bottom of the installation there. The central picture shows Stillaguamish winter village made of mats and wood structures. And then on the far right, a Stillaguamish canoe and shooting the rapids in Stillaguamish canoe. So you can turn the slide.
All right. There's a little bit of a gap, so I have to be careful.
Salmon was the primary economic resource for the Stillaguamish tribe, and their villages flanked the Stillaguamish River to take advantage of the seasonal salmon runs. At other times, extended family groups moved to other areas to hunt and collect other types of resources. They were also very adept at making and using canoes to navigate the rivers, and in the early historic period, they were frequently hired to freight supplies up and down the Stillaguamish River for the early settlers. The Stillaguamish also cultivated root crop, root crops such as wild onions, Indian carrots, camas, and tobacco in the prairies, not directly on the Stillaguamish, but further inland. And they also domesticated or grew wapato, which is a type of potato in the freshwater wetlands. The slide here on the right shows a fishing weir. These are Stillaguamish men who are capturing salmon using a fishing weir that extends out into the Stillaguamish River. The bottom right, you see freighting by canoe. And in the far left, during the historical period, economic resources were a little harder to find for the Stillaguamish, and so they hired on with seasonal labor at various places in Puget Sound and as far south and east as Yakima, where they would pick hops during the growing season in Yakima. The Stillaguamish today is a federally recognized tribe and operates out of Arlington. So now we can move on to the early historic period.
All right, Susan, I'm got a little binding up here.
Sorry about that.
Oh, well, goes with the pandemic. Come on.
The first known white visitor to the South Stillaguamish River was a fellow named Sam Hancock, who asked Stillaguamish tribal members to take him upriver to see a coal seam in 1850. This coal seam was along the southern tributary of the Stillaguamish River, not very far from James Creek. In the mid-1860s, settlers arrived to the mouth of the Stillaguamish River, so about 10 years later, 15 years later. And as logging efforts began moving upstream, first from the ocean shorelines upriver, the settlers followed, settling into the areas that were cleared by the loggers. And you can see this through time, this gradual migration of people upriver. So that by the 1880s, people began settling around Arlington and the areas where the north and southern tributaries joined together, and then moving mostly up the northern branch of the Stillaguamish, but also the southern branch of the Stillaguamish. This quote that you see on this slide, the previous slide, comes from 1876.
Sorry.
That's okay. Documents the settlement of the lower parts of the Stillaguamish River. In 1889, a logging camp was established at Haller City at the forks of the north and south branches of the Stillaguamish. In the early 1890s, a road and railroad spur were built to the town from the coast to transport goods and logs downriver. And the Northern Pacific Railroad built a spur to Arlington, which was another small little town just about a quarter of a mile east of Haller City. They actually put the line, the depot, in Arlington itself and not in Haller City. So as you can imagine, the town grew up around Arlington rather than Haller City. So Haller City just sort of disappears from the record and becomes incorporated and merged into Arlington. So during the 1990s, the booming logging industry and the new railroad were responsible for Arlington's very rapid growth. By 1893, which is only 4 years after the town was settled, there were 500 people living in the area. This picture shows Arlington in about 1900. Also during the 1990s, the United States Government Land Office sent out survey crews to survey the Jim Creek drainage area. There was a strong interest in logging that, so it was important to get these surveys done so that people could acquire that land for logging purposes. During these surveys, the survey who worked in the Jim Creek drainage noted the rugged topography, the immense cedar, and the heavy growth of hemlock and dense undergrowth of vine maple, devil's club, and salmonberry. Even noted 3 rustic cabins, which were along Cub Creek in the Twin Lakes area. So that would indicate that people were already either logging or hunting up in the area before they even had the land surveys. Also, the previous slide showed a tree that has actually a GLO survey marker. This is located in the Twin Lakes area, and you can still see that today. So in the early years, transportation routes are very different than they were today. And the only way to access the upper Jim Creek Valley around 1900 was the E.B. Lake Riley Trail. In the early years, the northern branch of the Stillaguamish was settled much quicker and much earlier than the southern branch. So there were a lot of small homesteads and settlements all along the northern branch. One of these near Oso, there was a trail from Oso that extended southward to Lake Riley, where the red arrow is pointing. And then there was a foot trail that took you into the upper reaches of Jim Creek and where the installation boundary is. So this trail remained active until the logging companies moved in. So the first road that came into this area, and this was between Lake Riley and Oso, was put in by a man named Fred Jenner in 1903. So up until then, they were just walking and horse trails, and then an actual road was put in 1903. In 1905, Arlington businessmen established a power company on Jim Creek. They constructed a 63-foot high concrete dam to generate electricity for the city of Arlington. The power plant closed in 1928, and the dam was blown up in 1934. The little map on the left shows the location of where this dam was. It wasn't within the boundaries of the installation. It was further downriver, but it was definitely in the middle parts of the Jim Creek Valley. This dam was a barrier to salmon passage, so the 3 species of salmon that originally spawned up Jim Creek no longer spawned there after the dam was built. The dam was blown up in 1934, but the Stillaguamish tribe came in 2002 and removed the last remnants of that dam, hoping that the salmon would again return to the Jim Creek drainage. In 1907 and 1908, the E.B. Logging Company bought a controlling interest in the timber within the Jim Creek watershed, including the area of the Navy property where the transmitter is. Using local crews, the company logged the Jim Creek Valley and adjacent hills for almost 20 years, removing about 1 billion board feet of virgin old-growth timber. The company employed a crew of 100 men, 8 steam donkeys, and a Sessoms logging car lift designed by the company's general manager, Hugh Sessoms, who designed it to facilitate the movement of the loaded cars down an incline. The picture on the left shows you one of the old growth logs. It's so big that a small car is sitting on top of it. That shows you the size of some of this timber. The picture on the lower right shows Native American crews called log walkers. They were hired to drive the massive shingle boat downstream to eventually be transported down to the ocean. But the logging companies created huge ponds upstream to hold the cut-shaped bolts. And they would select a proper shape of land that had kind of a divot in it. And then huge amounts of horse manure were used to line the bottom of this to kind of seal it to create a pond. If there was too much water during flood season, they could just blow up these log dams. The Indians were hired to release these bolts from the pond and drive them downstream to the mills in Arlington. And these highly skilled log workers were known as log walkers. In the 1890s, not all of the Upper Jim Creek Valley was owned by the EB Logging Company or other loggers, but homesteads were also filed quite early on, mostly in just the Upper Jim Creek Valley. This slide shows you that there were 4 different people who filed homesteads within the installation boundary property. You have the green one, Herbert Sullivan, the pink one, Thomas Tierney, blue, William Muller and Henry Muller. William and Henry were brothers, and the others, Thomas Tierney filed a homestead, but it doesn't appear that he actually developed it, and Sullivan purchased his probably mostly for logging purposes. William Muller eventually built a cabin adjacent to Jim Creek on what became Navy property. His brother Henry built a cabin outside of the Navy boundary. This is a picture of William Muller's cabin as it looked in about 1940. These 2 brothers, William and Henry, obtained a 160-acre homestead patent, William in 1896 and Henry in 1899. Whereas William stayed and settled on his homestead, Henry moved to San Francisco in the early 20th century, selling off most of his original homestead except for 15 acres in the northeast corner. His property passed down to some of his descendants, and the part of his property remaining within the installation was never really improved. So farming actually didn't take off in the Upper Jim Creek Valley within the installation area until probably right after the Depression. It seems like a lot of people were interested in buying up rural land at that period of time, probably on the off chance that they made to maintain subsistence farming because the economy was so bad during that time. So the major homesteads that had been filed in the 1890s were subdivided up into smaller plots. And the rest of that land belonged to logging companies. So Emerson E.D. Hines bought 80 acres in Upper Jim Creek, 40 from Henry and 40 from William. E.D. built a new home and outbuildings near William's cabin on the first terrace above Jim Creek, where the Navy Vehicle Maintenance and Supply Warehouse are currently located today. Hines planted a filbert orchard on his farm, which you can see in the lower left there. E.D. was a skilled woodworker, building or renovating a home for his neighbor August Matson in the early 1930s and making furniture for sale. As you can see in this quote here, it appears that he was quite a very accomplished woodworker and furniture maker. Earl and Leona Watts bought the Hines farm in 1934. Earl Watts was a skilled craftsman and Caterpillar operator. During his tenure, he added an addition and basement to his home. Earl Watts died in a construction accident in 1942, and his wife Leona sold the south 40 acres containing the 3,300 tree filbert orchard to Todd W. Boyce just before the Navy bought it. So Boyce never had really any opportunity to develop that land at all before the Navy purchased that property. August and Molly Matson built a farm on 80 acres southeast of Hines, 60 acres of the William Muller and 20 acres of the Henry Muller homesteads. Matson lived on the property as early as 1931, but didn't purchase it until 1936. He operated a dairy farm with 11 acres under cultivation. Water was supplied by gravity flow from a spring. His property is where the recreational area is on the installation today. They have a climbing station and I think some fields, etc. It's just before you drop down into the lower Jim Creek Valley toward the transmitter station. Ernest Hines, the son of E.D., married Matson's daughter in 1934, and they lived briefly in William's log cabin on the Hines property. These pictures show remnants of the Matson home at the time the Navy property was purchased. The garden on the lower left, the house in the upper right, and then the fields on the lower right. And then in the early 1950s, the Navy comes in and buys this property. And Lex will tell you the rest of the story.
Thanks, Susan. All right, I think I got our clicking down. All right, following World War II, the Cold War began between the Soviet Union and the US in 1946, continued till the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991. This period witnessed the escalation of nuclear weaponry. After World War II, the US Navy began extending patrols in areas traditionally covered by the British Navy. This resulted in the need for long-range communications to issue directives to naval vessels. During the Cold War, the US developed what became known as the nuclear triad, which was based on the MAD, or mutually assured destruction concept. It involved a three-legged weaponry stool that included 24/7-hour patrols by Polaris thermonuclear missile-armed submarines, B-52 bombers carrying thermonuclear bombs, and integration with the land-based US Icbm missile system. This system was based on a deterrent strategy. If one country was hit by a nuclear first strike, it would have the ability to send a devastating nuclear response. The triad remains in place to this day, and it requires continuous uninterrupted communications with the Navy fleet deployed in distant locations. And just as a side, that slide you'll see in the lower middle, that's an ICBM missile site at Vandenberg Air Force Base, which I have recorded as a professional historian. So did some good work there. Submarines are obviously vulnerable and easily detected when they surface. The deployment of the Polaris missile in 1961 as the first submarine-launched ballistic missile helped stress the need to remain submerged as they formed the most effective nuclear deterrent due to their mobile and stealthy operation. Well, here's our first glitch.
Sorry about that. I'm not sure what happened.
I'm going to blame it on the pandemic. There we go. All right.
Absolutely. Okay. I think we were here.
There. Yes. Yes.
Okay. Sorry about that, everyone.
Oh, no. All right. So basically, while obviously the submarines need to be stealthy and mobile, their mission requires them to stay in touch with the Naval Command. Now, this is where the use of high-frequency radio signals were determined to be ineffective for submarines. Those signals cannot penetrate water. During World War II, submarines communicated to Navy commanders by using very slow rate, low frequency signals to remain submerged at periscope depth. They used a compact loop antenna for that. Navy communications planners recognized a need for very high power, very low frequency, or VLF radio transmitters to reach submarines patrolling across the globe. Okay.
Need to request remote control again, I think.
Oh, okay. I think we're going to need an intervention on your part. Nope, actually we're good. We're good. Following a series of site studies, Congress authorized the Navy to proceed with construction of a VLF transmitter at Jim Creek in July 1947. The Navy chose the Jim Creek site for its topography, isolated location, and the ability of reliable and low-cost power provided by the Bonneville Power Administration. Most of the Jim Creek property remained in the hands of various logging companies after EB Logging sold their interest. By 1949, when the Navy bought the property, Soundview Pulp Company was the primary landowner. The land within the boundaries was acquired by condemnation proceedings. In the Navy's contract with Soundview, the company was tasked with building new roads, you'll see in the right, and removing timber, you'll see the left, from the areas where the antenna field and support buildings would be constructed. The slope clearance along the sides of Wheeler and Blue Mountains increased runoff and flooding from heavy rainfall and snow melt. To control flooding, the Navy constructed an artificial channel to contain Jim Creek through the antenna field. The Navy contracted with the Radio Corporation of America, RCA, to design the facility and begin construction. Responsibilities of the Navy included oversight of transmitter and communication link building design. They also reviewed the design and construction of the officers and resident engineers' quarters, barracks, fire station, repair shop, rigging shop, heating plant, paint and oil storage, general storage, garage, and vehicle repairs. Essentially, they had a small town there. The transmitting equipment was manufactured at the RCA Victor plant in Camden, New Jersey. The completed mechanisms were transported to Seattle on 27 freight cars and then trucked to the site. Additional work included establishing a perimeter security fence around the property and access road construction. While the forest was clear-cut for the project, the Navy's forester Walter Briggs successfully lobbied for the preservation of old-growth forest that remains intact today. And looking at this photo, many of us say this project would never happen in today's current environmental regulatory process. Radio waves transmitted at VLF travel past the curvature of the Earth. They bounce off the atmosphere and return to Earth where they can be picked up. They do not experience interruptions from solar flares as do other frequencies. VLF radio waves also penetrate water so that submarines can still remain at deep levels. It's really worked out for them. The basic building blocks of radio communication is a radio wave, which occupies the lower regions of the electromagnetic spectrum. The full spectrum includes everything from radio waves to visible light. Wavelength describes the distance over which a wave's shape repeats and is typically measured between the two successive crests or troughs. You can see in this graphic in front of you. Frequency describes the number of waves that pass a fixed point in a given amount of time. Wavelength and frequency are inversely proportional. The lower the frequency, the longer the wavelength. The frequency of a radio wave is expressed in units called hertz. Mobile phones, GPS, Bluetooth, TV, and LAN radio. They use either the very high frequency VHF or ultra high frequency UHF radio bands measured in millions of hertz with a range between 30 and 3,000 megahertz. Naval radio station Jim Creek achieves its worldwide range by transmitting a very powerful, very low frequency VLF signal, one with a wavelength of approximately 7 miles and a frequency of only 24.8 kilohertz. The long wavelength of the Jim Creek transmitter signal means that it can pass undisturbed through most obstacles on and near the surface of the Earth that would interfere with the shorter wavelengths, including buildings and hills. The lower the frequency, the more readily a signal can penetrate liquids such as seawater. This enables submarines that are shallowly submerged to receive Jim Creek's signal without extending a telltale antenna above the water surface. Yet another advantage of VLF, and one of particular importance to the military, is that long wavelengths are highly resistant to jamming by atmospheric or man-made interference. Construction began with the clear cutting of timber on the two mountain slopes. After the slopes were cleared, 200-foot steel towers were erected on the crest, you can see in this graphic, of each mountain to anchor 10 catenary cables draped across the valley in a zigzag pattern. A catenary is the curved surface that is a flexible cable, wire, or chain that assumes when it's hanging freely between two elevated points. The antenna cable weaves from the western ridgetop towers between Blue and Wheeler Mountains to create a single antenna that crosses the valley 5 times. Essentially, they created a radio dish out of these two mountains. This weaving is duplicated between the eastern towers to form a single antenna that also crosses the valley 5 times. These cables are steel sheath copper. They're 1 inch thick. They range in length from 5,640 feet to 8,800 feet long and form the antenna dish. They're divided for redundancy to ensure that one half of the antenna can remain functional even if the other half is damaged or shut down for maintenance or repair. From the lowest point of each of the 10 catenary cables, a vertical cable called a down lead drops 900 feet to one of the 10 towers on the valley floor, which connects the antenna to the transmitter. These vertical cables are the main radiant elements of the antenna. The miles of sagging catenary cables forming the dish serve to increase the power of the signal coming from the transmitter. Each of the 10 strands vary in length from 1.5 to 2 miles and zigzag between 12 steel towers, 6,500 to 65 to 200 feet in height atop the parallel mountaintops of Wheeler and Blue Peak. Each antenna is a 1 inch cable of 37 steel cord phosphor bronze wire. 30 miles of the cable was required, in addition to the steel cables suspending the bronze sections above the valley. Now, to accommodate the potential accumulation of ice on the antenna wires and high winds, the span could sag as much as 1,063 feet. A nearly mile-long electrical transmission line supplies the transmitter building and is supported by 23 steel bus towers. Now, this is where we get into some pretty interesting statistics. The electrical power required to run the transmitter station equals a city of 25,000 people. At a later date, similar systems were also installed at Haiku and Oahu, Hawaii, and Trinidad in the West British Indies. The station's 1 million watt transmitter was twice the output than any existing military transmitter and 20 times greater than any US commercial radio station. In 1952, Campbell Atherton Construction of Seattle and Pomeroy Electrical Contractors of San Francisco began to string the antenna cables between the mountains at a height of 2,200 feet above the valley floor. It wasn't an easy task. Installation of the antenna cables proved difficult for the contractors due to 33 tons of pole strain on each cable. They ended up designing and constructing 2 hoists at a cost of over $360,000 in 2021 dollars that failed to do the job. Despite the challenges, they completed the job after 6 years to bring the facility online at a cost of over $135 million in 2021 costs. Here's the cable winch in action. One of my favorite parts of the transmitter reminds me of Frankenstein's lab. This view shows the newly constructed Helix house loading coils. The Navy formally accepted the system on November 17, 1953, during a ceremony attended by naval, industry, and government leaders. And on this slide, you'll see RCA Chairman David Sarnoff transmitting the first message from Jim Creek, dictated by Admiral Robert Carney in the background. 6 minutes after transmission, the acknowledgements began. The first came from the battleship Wisconsin, operating off Japan. The system went online the following day, and you'll note Mr. Sarnoff there, the system uses Morse code to this day. Viewed from above, the transmitter appears like an archer's target, with the transmitter building being the bullseye. Vegetation in the transmission field has to be kept low to prevent radio transmission interference. It's a constant task. This is a view of the transmitter building from Blue Mountain. Transmitter was installed in the second story of a windowless building constructed on the valley floor under and midway along the span of the overhead antenna array. The building is earthquake resistant and completely lined with copper sheathing to shield against intense electromagnetic radiation. As with the antenna, the transmitter is divided into two separable halves to ensure uninterrupted operation and redundancy in the event either half, for any reason, becomes unstable. This image shows the transmitter designated as Building 1. Note the letters NLK located over the entrance. They are the transmitter call letters. This 1950s image shows the control console during the initial operation in 1953. And much of this interior is intact with the exception of some digital upgrades to these panels. It's really a time warp. Here's the transmitter control building interior in the present day, showing how intact the interior is with its 1950s mid-century modern design features. It's pretty cool. This is the Helix house variometer. It's a device that indicates the rise and fall of electrical current. The walls in the rear are clad with copper panels. This 1950s technology is still reliable in the present day. Let's return to the reason this presentation has been made, about the replacement of the backup Worthington generator and modernization of Building 39. The generator housed in Building 39 since its installation in 1957 has served the installation as the primary emergency power source for over 60 years. The generator is driven by a 4-cycle V16 diesel engine that produces 3,600 horsepower at 450 PMS. And one thing I learned about Worthington, here is Henry Worthington. My wife grew up in Pittsburgh, and her father worked in one of the Pittsburgh Water Department pumping plants, and she knew all about Worthington and their various mechanisms. Now, the Worthington Corporation, who fashioned the transmitter backup generator, was an outgrowth of Worthington and Baker, founded in 1845 by Henry Worthington and William H. Baker to manufacture hydraulic equipment, steam pumps, and meters. Worthington designed the first duplex direct-acting steam pump in 1857. It's regarded as one of the most significant developments in steam pumps for steam vessels at that time. It was used to pump excess water out of the USS Monitor ironclad by the Union Navy during the Civil War. Worthington provided 2 of the steam pumps to naval architect John Erickson in 1862 during the ironclad's construction. The image on the upper right is a replica of one of the pumps used on the Monitor. Baker died in 1860, and the company was reformed in 1862 as Worthington Hydraulic Pump Works, located in Brooklyn, New York. Worthington continued his mechanical engineering work until his death in 1880. He was a founding member of the American Society of Mechanical Engineers. His contributions have been recognized by 2 historic mechanical engineering landmark designations. We hope you enjoyed this presentation. A video of the Worthington generation in operation is going to be provided for presentation. And with that, this video is approximately 18 minutes long.
Are we ready to go?
We are.
Thank you, Lex. All right, enjoy the video.
Holly, is there anything I'm missing?
What was that?
Is there anything missing? We're not seeing the video.
Oh my gosh, did I? I'm so sorry. We're blaming quarantine, right?
Yes.
Okay. I forgot to actually share the screen. I just started it on my computer. I thought something was weird. Sorry, everyone.
And we should be having some audio here.
What was that, Lex?
We need some audio here.
Can you not hear it?
No.
Oh. Well, that's weird.
You have to stop this share, restart, and click the button that says share computer audio.
Oh, yes. Okay, I see it. Thank you. Okay, we'll try one more time. Sorry, everyone.
The U.S. Naval radio station T, Jim Creek, is nestled in the western foothills of the Cascade Range, near Arlington, Washington. This location was selected for the generator in 1946 due to its compatible ground conductivity for the ground net, access to substantial power resources via the Bonneville Power Administration, and sufficient height, span, and area for the antenna cable array. Of this nearly 5,000-acre site, only 11 acres comprise the administrative area. This is where the generator building is located, along with the water tank, chlorinator building, and communication control link. Another 928 acres includes the antenna field, support towers, and transmitter building.
My name is Lloyd Palmer. I work at Jim Creek Naval Radio Station. Right here you're seeing a sand table diorama thing of the entire base. When you go down here, we are currently located down here in the main building at MWR. The majority of the buildings have been destroyed and razed over the years, but this used to be a functional base of 250 sailors. At peak was in like 1960. Now it's ran by mostly Department of Defense civilian employees and Navy personnel. I currently work at the transmitter building, which is way up in the valley. As you can see, way up to the top here where all the wires, which is the antennas that crisscross the valley. The original Jim Creek building was started in 1948, completed in 1952 by RCA. So you look through here and you'll see all the bases. There were numerous buildings. You had housing areas all through here and old quarters, as you can see. And then you had the headquarters building and mess hall and dining facilities, barber shops, and a enlisted club on the base. And down below was the engineers that maintained the base roads and facilities themselves. The transmitter building, building 1, is way up in the valley. And if you notice underneath the wires here, the antenna system, there are 2 arrays. There's a west array and an east array. There's actually 2 antennas that we transmit off of. We can capable of transmitting up to 1 million watts off this antenna. We transmit all the way to Australia and underneath the polar ice cap at the North Pole.
Jim Creek has been responsible for ship-to-shore communications since the site began running in 1953. Their technology allows them to communicate with submerged submarines by using very low frequencies, VLF, to reach past the surface of the ocean. The U.S. submarine fleet has proven to be an effective deterrent to foreign threats, so as you can imagine, a reliable power source to ensure reliable communication is essential. This is where the Worthington Generator came in. The Worthington Generator was constructed off-site at the Worthington Corporation facility in Buffalo, New York. It was officially acquired by the U.S. Navy in 1952 at a cost of $1,006,897. It was then transported over 2,600 miles to the Jim Creek site. Following installation, testing, final acceptance, and activation in 1956, the generator came online in 1957. The Worthington Generator has successfully served as the primary backup for the Jim Creek station for 62 years, or approximately 543,120 hours, pending its scheduled retirement in early 2019. It has performed a critical role ensuring that the facility remained operating without interruption. The generator will be retired and replaced in 2019, now that it has passed its work life expectancy and its performance and technology are outdated. With such intricate and advanced technology came precise processes and complex machinery. One of these important processes is the starting of the generator. Before starting the engine, all 16 of the blowdown valves and the start air valve will be opened. The engine will then be rolled over, and all excess fluids will be blown out of the cylinders. At this point, all 16 blowdown valves are reclosed. The first step to starting the engine is to turn on the crankcase ventilation. Once the crankcase ventilation has been turned on, the operating lever will be placed into the start position. Air will then be injected into all 16 cylinders. Once the engine begins to fire, the lever will be dropped to the run position. And speed will be gradually increased on the electro-hydraulic governor actuator until 450 RPMs is reached. As you can see, the generator had many complex parts working together elaborately to produce the essential power source needed for the Jim Creek site. Three main pieces of the equipment include the radiator, diesel engine, and generator. Let's explore some of the main equipment seen in the generator room. The control lever mechanism is this entire setup, including a manual throttle lever and synchronized engine governor. This equipment is used in the starting and stopping process of the generator. Some components of the control lever mechanism include governor, governor lever, cam follower, cam, lock, hand lever, control casing, stop, and run. This is the prime mover control panel. Some of the main controls include the speed gauge, crankcase vacuum switch, and each individual section, which monitors lube oil pressure, temperature, fuel oil pressure, and the jacket water pressures and temperatures. When certain parameters are exceeded, the control panel has an annunciator horn that will alert to any abnormal condition. This equipment is the actual generator itself. The movement of this equipment is what generates the electricity. The crankshaft is a single-piece forged unit with a flanged drive vent for coupling the shaft to the extension shaft. Some of the parts associated with this piece of equipment include the number 1 cylinder crank, thrust bearing, crank pin, crankshaft gear, crankshaft, base, flywheel end, and crankcase access ports. The head of the unit is located on the second level of the generator equipment, accessible by ladder. This is where the piston chambers and camshaft are located. This is the generator and exciter panel. This is how the generator is actually placed online.
There's 2 different ways it can be placed online. It can either be closed to a dead bus, meaning there's no grid power coming onto the base. To do so, this breaker would be closed. This rheostat would be brought up to 4,200 volts. And then this breaker would be closed. This is the actual generator circuit breaker. To parallel this generator to the grid, this breaker would be closed. We would match grid voltage, place this switch to the synchronized mode. There is a synchroscope right here where we can raise or lower the frequency of the generator using this knob right here. We would raise the frequency until that needle is going slowly in the fast direction, and then close this breaker, which is the generator circuit breaker, once the generator comes into phase at the top dead center position.
This is the lube oil cooling water tower, jacket water cooling tower, and diesel day tank, which gravity feeds diesel down to the attached fuel oil pump and then into the injectors of the diesel. The engine exhaust duct is used to guide exhaust gases away from the controlled combustions inside the engine. Before being released, the exhaust gas first flows through the cylinder head, exhaust manifold, and a turbocharger to increase engine power. If we took this entire arrangement of equipment and cut it in half, you would see some of the inner workings of the system. Some of this inner equipment includes air intake, exhaust valve, fulcrum bracket lever, inlet valve, push rod, cylinder head, piston, connecting rod, camshaft, crank pin, water outlet, exhaust, air inlet, cylinder liner, rubber rings, water inlet, frame, relief cover, and base. If we continue downstairs, you'll find the lube oil sump for the engine, the lube oil circ pump, and the lube oil prelude pump, which keeps oil circulating through the engine 24/7 when not in use. In another room of the generator building, you'll find more equipment, including the young radiator unit. The radiator consists of a motor, a right-angle gearbox, a fan, and intake louvers. Here we have the lube oil cooling water heat exchanger. Its primary purpose is to cool down the oil by transferring the oil's heat to the cool water through proximity. This ensures the oil temperature stays within its ideal operating range. These tanks are storage tanks for starting air for the diesel. Finally, we have some spare parts, including the valve seats, spare cylinder sleeve, and spare head unit. In order to stop the generator, the engine is brought to an idle speed on the electro-hydraulic governor actuator by lowering the dial. The control handle lever is then dropped from run to stop. Once the engine comes to a complete stop, all 16-cylinder blowdown valves are reopened and the start air valves are shut. With the Worthington diesel engine generator's scheduled removal, it will be replaced with a newer, more efficient generator. The replacement equipment will include 2 new standby-rated diesel engine generator sets that each produce 2.5 megawatts of power at full load. The maximum speed of the new generator is 1800 RPM, which is a huge improvement in comparison to the old generator's maximum speed of 450 RPM. Each of the new engines are manufactured by Caterpillar and are Model 3516C, 4-stroke cycle, turbocharged and aftercooled, with Tier 4 compliance seal. Each of the 16 cylinders arranged in a V configuration has a 6.7-inch bore and an 8.5-inch stroke with a compression ratio of 14:1. The replacement of this generator will improve efficiency in operations and will ensure that the Jim Creek U.S. Naval Radio Station maintain the station's mission and effectiveness.